Chipotle. Chipotle is my life.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Chipotle. Even if you've never stepped foot into one of these establishments, you've probably heard the praises that are sung on high about Chipotle. Just like this little guy said, Chipotle is definitely a regular part of my life. But has anybody really stopped to think about how Chipotle operates as a company, how they make their food, or where they came from so suddenly? Together, we can find out a little bit more about Chipotle if we just do a little bit of digging. So sit back, relax, and brace yourselves for an onslaught of deliciousness. First, let's take a look at Chipotle from a bird's eye view. Their main headquarters is located in Denver, Colorado, and the latest numbers show that they have over 53,000 employees. They were operating 1,738 locations as of 2014, and each restaurant utilizes around 29 employees, from managers to line workers. They are classified by the Standard Industrial Classification System as eating places, which could be any place that you could possibly get food from. But more specifically, they are classified by the North American Industry Classification System as a limited service restaurant, which is slightly different from full service restaurants or fast food, which we'll talk about more later. Chipotle is a fairly new player to the food industry, as they were founded in 1993 with a goal to show that food served fast doesn't have to be a fast food experience. Chipotle continues to be devoted today to finding the best ingredients that they can, with respect for animals, farmers, and the environment, which is a very true statement considering they source all their products from local farms and hold their suppliers to very high quality standards. Their mission statement that reflects this purpose is the business of good food. Besides the adorable hamsters that love eating burritos and tortillas, we need to ask ourselves who the customers of Chipotle are. For starters, Chipotle is not expanded beyond the limited service industry and only competes within the borders of the United States. This means that they do not have any international divisions and only have to cater to U.S. tastes. Thus, the primary focus of Chipotle's target market is individual consumers that live within the United States, are 18 to 34 years old, have obtained some college education, usually a bachelor's degree, and are part of the upper middle class under the mass affluent segment. Now that may sound way too specific of a population to ever create enough revenue, but according to information from the 2007 US Census, there are roughly 13.3 million households making up the mass affluent market. This is not to say that younger children and older generations won't be visiting any Chipotles. In fact, it was mentioned that the central group does have high family values and will usually have a spouse and or children to bring along with them. However, their marketing and planning sectors focus mainly on the primary group that was described. Another question to ask is what drives the demand for Chipotle? First and foremost is going to be price. Price can affect demand depending on whether consumers see it as too high or too low. For Chipotle, their prices are slightly higher than most fast food joints because the average ticket is between $8 and $15, as compared to $3 or $7 at a traditional fast food establishment. However, they are cheaper than a sit-down restaurant, and that could end up being $20 or more. Because Chipotle is targeting a higher-end client, their customers usually don't mind paying a bit more for better quality food. Another determinant is income. Depending on how much disposable income consumers have will affect their decisions on what to buy with their money. Again, because Chipotle is catering to their specific market, their consumers place value on the quality meal that they're getting. Not to mention that this segment has a bit more spending cash than most people who are strapped to nothing but cheap fast food meals. Kinda like college students. The price of related goods or substitutes can also affect demand for a product because lower prices for similar goods can draw customers away. Unfortunately, Chipotle operates in the food industry, which means there are tons of substitutes. When you drive down the street that has all of the fast food joints on it, you have anywhere between 10 and 20 different options. So the price of alternate goods can be a negative for Chipotle if there are many cheap fast food restaurants in the area. Fortunately, the target market for Chipotle is more health conscious than other markets, and they will usually avoid cheap fast food in favor of full-service sit-down restaurants or other locations that they deem healthy. This is where Chipotle's price becomes comparable to other available goods. And lastly, there is taste. Tastes are an excellent topic for a cooking class, but not so much for an economics class, as it's not easy to explain consumers' taste in an economic sense, but it does play a huge role in what customers want, and therefore what they demand. For Chipotle consumers, the biggest thing about taste is the changing mindset in their demographic that fast food can be healthy, and that's what Chipotle has been preaching ever since they opened. This is how Chipotle is differentiating themselves and making themselves more appealing to the shifting taste of younger generations. Another thing to look at when considering demand is how much it fluctuates based on a timeline to see if demand is seasonal. To illustrate this, here's a graph depicting the revenue earned by Chipotle from each quarter all the way back to 2011. If you look closely, you may notice that there are slight dips along the graph, and it just so happens that these dips commonly occur at the ending quarter near the last of the year. This could indicate a cyclical fluctuation in demand. This could be due to the holidays and consumers wanting to save money on everyday expenses in order to spend more on gifts or special occasions. Elasticity is also something to consider when talking about Chipotle's market. There are four main distinctions that help determine the elasticity of demand for a firm. The number of available substitutes will usually have a big impact on the elasticity of demand because this will determine how easy it is for consumers to switch brands. If a good has more substitutes, the demand will usually be more elastic, while if a good is hard to substitute, it will usually be inelastic. For Chipotle, if we consider them as a fast casual Mexican dining, there would be several good substitutes for their product, and they would be leaning towards having elastic demand. Another factor is how broadly the market is defined. Narrowly defined markets tend to have more elastic demand than broadly defined markets because it is easier to find close substitutes for narrowly defined goods. Even though a broad definition of just food would fit Chipotle and make its products hard to substitute, the fast casual Mexican dining is a more accurate description of their offering, meaning they would have more elastic demand because there are many substitutes. The distinction of whether a good is a necessity or a luxury is also a major player in elasticity. However, this distinction is usually up to the buyer. For some people, like those who enjoy Chipotle several times a week, they could consider Chipotle a necessity and they would not replace it with anything else. While those of us who only enjoy it when we have the extra money would consider it a luxury and could usually find a substitute for it, making demand more elastic. Lastly, the time period in consideration plays a role in determining elasticity. The longer the time period, the longer people have to adjust, and the more elastic demand will become. For our purposes, we have taken into account 5 years worth of stats and financial information, so we'll just consider our time period as being 5 years. And while some people are already dependent on their Chipotle fix, it would be a safe bet that 5 years would be plenty of time for consumers to switch to a different restaurant. All things considered, Chipotle would be considered as having more elastic demand than inelastic. We also need to ask, what kind of a market does Chipotle compete in? The market structure can make a big difference in both the strategy and the planning of a firm, which drives their actions. A good indicator of market structure is the number of competitors operating in the market. Monopolies have only one firm, oligopolies have a handful of firms, and both perfect competition and monopolistic competition have many competitive firms. For Chipotle, they compete with a wide range of fast food, fast casual, and full-service restaurants, all trying to earn the hungry customer's dollar. This would put them into either perfect competition or monopolistic competition. To further define the market, we can consider how similar or different the products of a firm are. If products are identical, this would be considered perfect competition, where all the firms are price takers. While if the products are differentiated, this would be monopolistic competition, where the firm does have some pricing power. In Chipotle's case, their product can be distinguished from other products based on the quality, the look, or the taste, so they would have product distinction. Another test of market structure is how difficult it is for firms to enter or exit the market. Monopolies usually keep out any other firms due to barriers to entry, while monopolistic competition and perfect competition typically have free entry and exit. In the food industry, there are no restrictions or barriers to prevent a new firm from opening, so Chipotle operates in a market that does not have barriers to entry. When you add together the multiple firms, the distinguished products, and the lack of barriers to entry, it's pretty easy to see that Chipotle's market structure is monopolistic competition. It is also important to figure out who exactly competes against Chipotle. There could be an argument made that every single food establishment is a competitor. However, this is not a very accurate statement. It is more realistic to determine competitors based on a scale of similarity. In order to illustrate this, we'll create a strategic group map that shows both the quality of the food provided and the type of service provided. Full service can be defined as sit-down restaurants that have waiters who serve your table or booth, while fast food does not have waiters, and instead you place an order at a counter or a drive-thru and pick up the food yourself. While the middle of the scale is where fast casual lies. This interesting cross between the extremes does not have drive-thrus, nor do they have waiters, but they combine the higher quality food of casual restaurants with the fast service of fast food to create a unique place for themselves. There are also subgroups that fall somewhere in between the established categories. And now we need to dive into the important financial analysis of Chipotle. Overall, the fast casual industry makes up a $21 billion industry, with the Mexican category making up more than $8 billion. Chipotle raked in roughly $4.1 billion in sales during 2014, which means they captured over half of the market share. In more specific numbers, we're going to briefly look at Chipotle's revenue and net income over the past 5 years. First, we'll notice that the revenue growth is hovering around 20%, which is a rather large percentage for growth. This could be interpreted to mean that Chipotle is still in its growth phase and the market has not yet matured. There was a slight dip in 2013, however the numbers shot back up the following year. You can see a similar trend in net income with a slight dip in 2013 and then soaring numbers in the next year. Net income and revenue have slightly different percentages, and this is due to revenue being all of the sales and net income being what's left over after all the bills are paid. Net income can sometimes be a better indicator just because it accounts for how well the company is utilizing their income. Ideally, we would want to compare Chipotle's financial information directly with its competitors. However, since the competitors we have identified in our strategic group map are privately held, it is nearly impossible to get financial information on those firms. However, in order to see how well Chipotle is doing, comparatively speaking, we can compare Chipotle to the fast casual industry. In this comparison, we can see that Chipotle is either on par with or outperforming the rest of the industry in the majority of the categories. The measures that really stand out are the quarterly revenue growth average, the gross margin average, and the earnings per share average. It's clear to see that Chipotle has a handle on the competition, even if the competition is their entire industry. In conclusion, we have learned that Chipotle is in the business of good food, and they seek to provide guests with an exceptional fast casual experience that they can feel good about. They cater to a young crowd in the mass affluent demographic sector. They operate in a monopolistic competitive market with a very elastic demand. They consistently maintain great earnings and financials. And overall, Chipotle is not only delicious, but they're also a great example of how to successfully run a business. Now that we've learned a little bit more about Chipotle, you can feel good knowing about the company who may be making your next delicious lunch. Thank you.